Bottom line, Reed let me go, fired me. It was kind of very disappointing and I was hurt a lot. I also said to myself at that moment, I'm going to prove you're wrong. The only way you can improve is by accepting that, hey, maybe you aren't as good or as smart as you think you are. And so really what it came down to is, what did I need to learn in order to be a leader of a company? I had to surround myself with really smart people, with people who I could learn from.
How long were you with Netflix from inception to whenever?
I was the head of business development for 5 years.
5 years.
I left the year after we went public. So we went public, we were trying to go public in April of 2001, a very auspicious month when the dot-com bubble burst. And we had to pull that going public. And then a year later, in May of 2002, we went public, and I left in February of 2003 as an employee, but then Reed brought me back as a consultant to explore expansion into Europe and Japan.
Interesting. Okay. Is it fair to ask, and frankly, are you allowed to talk about, what were the reasons why you left at that time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it wasn't something I wanted. Bottom line, Reed let me go, fired me. And I remember, these are really sad moments. He asked me to go out to the parking lot with him. And he said, Mitch, now that we're public, and this is it's been 9 months since we went public. He said, I just don't think you're going to cut it in a business that is public.
Yeah.
And I asked him why. And he said, well, because, and by the way, Marc had just left. Marc had left 2 or 3 months before.
Yeah, I knew he left around the same time, right?
Okay. Yeah. He left in November of the previous year. Mm-hmm. And I asked him why. And he said, well, you are a rule breaker. You're constantly trying things without, kind of thinking them through, going through the organization, getting approval. And, you're just constantly trying things. And, we have to be more methodical. We have to be kind of more by the book, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, but listen, you are an amazing innovator. So we would like you to stay on as a consultant to go to Europe and go to Japan and come back and tell us, should we expand there? So it was kind of earth-shattering, it was kind of very disappointing, and I was hurt a lot. I also said to myself at that moment, I'm going to prove you're wrong. I'm going to, in fact, my whole time, which was 8 years at Redbox and McDonald's, was essentially to prove I could work and I could be valuable in a big public company environment. And his firing of me was an incredible motivator.
You talked about it, but maybe you could talk more deeply about converting that into the fuel that became your next chapter.
Yeah. Well, it's those types of motivations. In a very crass way, it was to prove Reed was wrong. It wasn't for my own.
But is it fair to say, though, that in order to prove that he was wrong to a certain degree, you had to accept that he was right?
Yes, absolutely. And he was right.
Yeah.
That's
beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
It is absolutely true. Is the only way you can improve is by accepting that, hey, maybe you do, maybe you aren't, as good or as smart as you think you are. And so really what it came down to is, what did I need to learn? And in order to be a leader of a company, which was what I wanted to be, what I wanted to be. I admired Reed. I wanted to be as good as he was. And so, in order to do that, what I had to do was I had to surround myself with really smart people, with people who I could learn from, like Marc Randolph. I mean, Marc Randolph, for me at Netflix, was an amazing inspiration. And at Redbox, that's what I started doing. I started trying to figure out how do you build a team around you that is smarter than you, but at the same time willing to teach you, willing to kind of be a group, a team that wants to win together as opposed to win on their own, be the star.
And what would you say is the critical characteristic that you have to develop in yourself and also has to be perceived by them for them to not only for them to actually, like you said, want to teach you and trust you enough to feel safe enough to not just be about themselves?
That was the hardest thing for me to figure out. And I was failing at it miserably over the first couple of years. I got a lot of great people to work with who were doing amazing work, but we weren't working kind of as when things got difficult, you could see the team breaking apart. What the philosophy I was operating on was treat everybody the same and show that I'm willing to work as hard as they are. That's what I thought would build that kind of, comradeship and that kind of teamwork.
Which seems like a very reasonable thing to think.
Yeah, it seemed totally logical, but it wasn't working. It wasn't working yet. It was working while things were going great. But when challenges happened, there was a point in time where the Americans with Disability groups sued us at Redbox because our touchscreen was 4 inches too high. By that time, we already had thousands of kiosks out there, and it's a metal box. What are we going to do to fix it? And we had all kinds of other issues. There was a class action lawsuit for $600 million because they said our $1 a night, no late fees ever. That $1 a night was actually a late fee. So I ended up hiring an organizational psychologist in Chicago, a brilliant guy. And he sat me down and said, you're treating everybody the same and you're assuming everybody wants the same thing out of their life. But he said, that's wrong. That is absolutely the wrong way to build a team. You have to care enough about each of the people you work with to learn what's important to them and to help them get it. Some people, as examples, he said, some people want more money. Some people want more respect. Some people want more time. But whatever it is, you need to find out what they want and build that opportunity for them to get that when they do a great job as a team member. And that one thing, taking that lesson and really taking the time to learn kind of personally what each of the people who I worked with, what they really wanted out of life, and then figuring out how to give them the opportunity to get that, that's what changed everything. And, at that point, we went from being a couple $100 million a year in revenue to 3 years later, $1.5 billion in revenue, with $300 million in free cash flow. And it was that.
And it was simply shifting your perspective from I'm going to treat everyone the same, because I think that's fair, to I'm going to treat everyone. It's kind of like being a parent, right? I'm actually going to get to know what makes my kids different.
Yep, exactly.
Even to the degree that it could be described as unfair, like, oh, well, you're treating them differently. And it's like, yeah, because I've gotten to know them and they are different fundamentally.
Right. Exactly.
So I'm gonna interrupt us, but in editors, you don't need to edit this out. But whoever ends up editing this, please note the timestamp when Mitch shared that particular insight and send it to me so that I can share it with our executive team, because that's $1 billion lesson. Thank you, Mitch.
My pleasure.
I like to use this as, this content in as many different ways as I can. Right. So this is going to be a teaching
repurpose
tool. Yeah. Okay. So, thank you for that. That's brilliant. So, but what I really love about reading about the early days of Netflix, and for some context, we've actually used Netflix as a teaching tool inside of our own company. So we were sort of into Netflix apocryphal lore before I met you or Marc. And so, it's kind of cool to really get to meet the people. But what I love about it is you get the sense that it really wasn't, it's very pure in its entrepreneurial roots from the standpoint of like, it was about the nobility and the integrity of the idea and about doing something better and about the disruption. It really wasn't like, hey guys, I think I have a hack and we can make $100 billion or something. Right?
Right.
You agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, for me, it was just an incredible learning experience. But the biggest thing was that mix of people that came together and really, truly had a kind of a vision of doing something really great. It almost, in a way, didn't have a lot to do with the idea. It was, how do you create a culture that continues to innovate and continues to do stuff that's fun and cool? It wasn't like we had to, deliver entertainment. It could have been anything. And that was kind of the magic of that group.
Yeah. And reading about it, with what was it? I've read about Marc. Obviously, I read about Reed. I've read about Marc, yeah. And I've read about you. Like, would you say you guys were you the Three Musketeers, or were there other parties that were there right there on day one too?
Well, in the beginning, it was really Marc and Reed. I was the video guy. I was the guy who knew the video rental entertainment business. I had owned,
which by the way is kind of funny because like the fact that Netflix existed without a guy that knew the video rental entertainment business is funny because that's like the whole business, right?
Right, exactly. Well, that's what I mean. It could have been any business. Yeah. The culture was, how do you do something really cool and innovative? This just happened to be, and Marc has probably told you, he was the VP of corporate marketing for Reed's company, Pure Atria. And another company had bought them and said, we'll pay you guys your salaries for the next 3 months, but you're out of a job after that.
That was the software business, right?
That was the software business.
That came after the mail order business for Marc.
No, this was the business that Reed owned before Netflix and that Marc worked for. And so it was really Marc just coming up with, okay, so what do I do? And just so happened DVD had just launched about 6 months before that. And Marc thought, geez, this very light, flexible format could be sent in the mail and, build a really interesting, innovative business.
So at the time that they're doing that, they're driving. And actually, let's back up even further. Yeah. In fact, you know what? Let's just go right there right away. Okay. Your backstory is like so crazy and interesting and cool. And maybe let's just go there for the audience's benefit. Because I've been reading about it. I was lucky enough to get an advanced copy of your book. I've been reading about it, but maybe let's let everyone hear you talk about it. Like, how did you end up being the video distribution knowledge base that they would end up partnering with? What's the journey that got you to that point?
Well, it started, I was one of those latchkey kids that, my brother and my parents worked till 6 or 7 o'clock every day. We would come home at 3 from school and watch TV. And I became enamored by TV series and movies and so on. So I think everything starts by, my passion for entertainment, which is, kind of not the creative side, but I became really interested in how do you market? How do you get someone to want to see something? What do you tell them about it? So that
what age would you say you got interested in that? Because that's kind of a peculiar thing, let's say, for a little kid to think about.
It was in kind of middle school, junior high, middle school.
So there was like a proclivity there, like somehow you were primed to be interested in that, it seems.
Yeah, I remember, watching the ads on TV for things like F Troop or Get Smart or those TV shows. And I just kept thinking, do they show this clip versus another clip to get in the advertising to get you to be interested? And I just found this whole concept of trying to link the demographics to the content, just a fascinating, interesting thing. And but then it kind of left my life for a while. I went to Europe. I spent some years there, and it was only when I came back in the 70s.
And where are you from, by the way? Sorry.
I'm from Northern California.
Okay.
My father was an aeronautic engineer, and we moved, I think, 13 times around California based on the job that was going on at the time.
So at some point you went to Europe.
Yep.
Got into some craziness there. I'll let people read the book, but there's some pretty crazy stories.
Yeah, I had some interesting adventures. It was a different age. There weren't computers. Everything was on paper. So it was a much freer world. No credit cards, no internet. Very, very different world than from today. But when I came back to the U.S., this new phenomena of video stores had just gotten going. This is like the very early 80s. And because of my kind of love for movies and TV shows, I became probably the most valuable customer to one of the only 4 video stores in the Bay Area called Captain Video.
And these were it was still like a mom and pop industry. This was pre-Blockbuster.
Yeah, totally mom and pop. There was 4 stores in the entire Bay Area. And they were very small, but doing really, people were just like me, had voracious appetites to just, it was almost like you were, a big time director or movie producer. They were the only ones prior to this that could watch movies in their own home, when they wanted to watch them. Up till then, it was Disney at 7:30 on Sundays, the Disney movie of the week. And so to me, it just seemed like an incredible liberation. And unfortunately, I spent all my money renting movies, buying blank tape, recording, until I finally realized, I have some ideas on how to make the business better. And it was mostly driven by all the problems that video stores in those days had. Everything was on paper. There was no knowledge, no information on what was renting, who was renting what. And so that's when I started devising this idea of building a computer-backed system that would rent movies and be able to give you more analytics to understand what to buy versus just buy whatever you want.
Okay, so high school dropout to high school dropout. So talk a little bit, because you're describing, reasonably sophisticated purview for a young person who's like, I'm into renting movies. You know what? Let me spend my spare time figuring out how to optimize this business operation. You're a high school dropout. Like, how do you think you got to the point where that was where your head was at? And frankly, how'd you get the skills to have anything to offer?
Yeah, well, I was always, I think it all came from my dad, but I was always into analytics and math. He was an aeronautic engineer, and I remember him teaching me, how to do complex mathematical equations. And so I think I just had a natural love and passion for that. And the other side of my family, and I didn't realize this till later, but the other side of my family were shoe salesmen and ran shoe stores in Omaha, Nebraska. And I found that I also had a real passion for working with customers, for that kind of one-to-one relation. So I think really the thing that led me to Netflix was that kind of passion for the customer and that passion for analytics. And those two things, drove kind of more of deeper, kind of building a more sophisticated model to serve the customer with entertainment.
Can you give me the super quick version of why you ended up dropping out of high school?
It was two things. One, I hated people telling me what to do.
I feel you. Sorry. Score one for us rebels.
Yeah. And I just over and over again, teachers would tell me something I knew was not accurate. And it would just drive, I remember the last day of school in history, I literally threw my books up to the front desk at the teacher saying, keep your history books. And I didn't say it, but inside I'm going, you know what? I can learn more from reading about history than you can tell me. And so it was that combination, not liking people to tell me what to do, and also the sense that there was a better way to learn.
Oh, I love it. I'm not sure. I mean, we've probably all met lots of high school dropouts, but I'm not sure that I've talked to another person like this who, like myself, literally withdrew themselves from high school as a youth based on intellectual integrity of no, I can do better without. And I mean, this is about you, not me, but I'll just share as a connection moment. When the truancy officer called my parents and said, your son has been skipping school, we're going to give him a ticket if we see him. And they came to me and said, where have you been? Yep. The answer was, I've been skipping class to go to the library because I learn more by reading the books than by sitting in the classes. Same kind of deal.
Yeah, you and I are very similar. Fortunately for me, they couldn't find me in Europe because that's where I went.
Oh, so you hightailed it.
Yeah, I left and went to live with my dad, who lived in Munich at that time. But you and I are very similar. It wasn't to not learn, it was to learn better and learn. Oh,
now
more.
I'm going to make this really cheesy and say learner and low.
Yeah.
Perfect. Wow. Sorry.
Learner and low.
Okay.
Anyway. There was a musical there.
Yeah, exactly.
But that all and this is why I find what you do so fascinating is, there's, if you have a passion for what you do and you work hard at it, then it doesn't matter, what system you use. It's figuring it out yourself, or at least finding an acceptable system for learning or advancing, what you want to do in life, which I think is super important.
Yeah. No, well said. Well said. So I'm loving it, by the way. Your story is not only inspiring and validating for me personally, but I think for the audience, I don't care if somebody's 15 or 55, there is that moment when you say, I think my life can be more if I unplug myself from the matrix, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I want people to capture from this moment. Not it's too late. I should have done it in high school. Yeah. So anyway, please then pick up the narrative. So you started focusing on analytics and data and how to create a better operational and user experience for video stores, and kind of where do we go from there?
Yeah. So I had developed this company along with one of the co-founders of a company called Autodesk, which is a CAD system, a very sophisticated software company. It was the beauty of owning video stores is that you met all kinds of cool people who would come into your store, talk movies. And we devised this company that put video stores on the internet.
And what year was this?
This is 1995.
And at this point, the Bay Area is now a hub of technology and innovation, right? Just
beginning. I mean, you're right. Google hadn't been founded yet.
Right.
It was, of course, Apple was around, but very small. It was, so we had developed this company that had a menu-driven program to put video stores on the internet or any stores. Remember, at this time, Amazon was advertising on the radio. The way they were getting, because their radio ad was, we have more books than could fit on the Queen Mary. And, they had not yet gone beyond books.
Which meant they were also targeting people that knew what the Queen Mary was.
Right. If you're in California, you kind of knew. But
fair enough.
So I was exhibiting this product at a trade show in 1997 in Las Vegas. And that's where I met Marc Randolph. Marc and I have slightly different versions on exactly what happened in this meeting, but he came up to my booth. I was promoting, this internet product. He clearly was not a potential customer, but he was asking all these really interesting questions. His main question was, okay, so DVD has just come out. Do you think it would go through the post office and survive? And I thought, why in the world would someone ask that question? And then he would ask questions like, do you think customers would rent on the internet, would pick their movies on the internet and have them mailed to them? And he knew that at that time, not only did I have this company, but I was president of the trade association of video retailers around the country. And I was also the head of the whole trade show that he was attending, which was a big show in Las Vegas. So I just knew this guy had something up his sleeve that he wasn't telling me about. And in my recollection is he started walking away and I grabbed him by the neck. He had a backpack on and, you get a lot of leverage when you hold someone at that point. And I pulled him as he's walking away, of course. And I said, wait a minute, you haven't even given me your name or phone number. And he ended up giving it to me and we started meeting on a regular basis halfway between where he lived and where I lived, which was about 60 miles from each other. And that's where this whole idea of a mail order DVD rental store came from.
Wow. Okay. Man, such a cool story. Because it's interesting. And I think for everybody listening, there's phases to business and there's role evolution and personality evolution and different personalities, sort of personality archetypes that fit at different phases. And so like you and I, we've already kind of identified a certain likeness, right? We're rebellious. We have problems with authority. If we don't want to go to high school, we just quit. We quit going, right? And it's interesting because my business right now, we're aggressively pushing, toward about a nine, kind of, you have these milestones, right? And right now we're pushing toward a 9-figure, $100 million revenue rate, right? And we're getting big enough that, we're starting to be a big company and we're starting to talk about things like, hey, we could go public someday. I mean, we've had people approach us like we actually had somebody last year courting us to build a roadmap to get listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange, go public there. And then eventually you can leapfrog to the NASDAQ. And we're like having all these conversations and I'm sitting here kind of like going, I'm 43. I spent my whole life making sure that I never had to be that accountable to anyone. And now I'm talking about potential, if that were to happen, I would suddenly be accountable to like everyone, like shareholders and a board. And, I remember when we started a department, we have a GRC department, right? Or RGC, risk, governance, and compliance. And I'm like, we have a risk, governance, and compliance department. They're going to tell me what to do someday, even though they work for me. And so it's just interesting to hear stuff like that. Now, I don't want to make this about me, but like, this is so interesting to me. And so tell me, so that happened and you said, okay, I'm going to prove them wrong. Clearly you did. Like, talk about that though. Like talk about the internal process though, before we get into the business stuff.
Yeah. Well, the first part is it's painful. I gave my heart and soul to Netflix. I contributed all I possibly could, because I was the guy who knew the video rental business. I brought Ted Sarandos on when Reed wanted me to move to LA to run content. I couldn't do it, so I brought Ted in. Ted, arguably today is the most powerful guy in Hollywood. He was my video store rep. He was the guy
Wow.
who used to come to my
because he runs the studio side, right? Isn't he involved in the studio side?
He now is the CEO of Netflix.
Oh, okay. So did he replace Reed when Reed stepped down from that?
Well,
okay.
What happened is, so first he was hired as the SVP of content. So he was running all the studio acquisition and so on. And then about a year or so ago, he became co-CEO with Reed. And I believe, at that time, really Reed stepped back. And whether it's official or not, Ted is really the CEO today. But so first it was like a lot of emotional stuff. And then I thought, you know what? Reed was probably right. And that challenge kind of made me think, you know what? I'm going to try and see if I actually can learn how to operate within a public environment. And I started, just exactly what you're mentioning about the risk departments, the legal departments, the finance departments. I thought, you know what? I can learn all that stuff.
Yeah.
All I need to do is to jump in and surround myself with people who know a lot more than me. And I actually became really fascinated and a avid student of it. I found myself borrowing copies of the Harvard Business Review.
Isn't big business just fascinating?
Oh God, yeah. It's.
The anatomy of an organization of a large, bigger than me, like that size. To me, it's every bit as interesting as the anatomy of a human body, and it's that complex, frankly.
Yeah. No, it actually. I found the human side of it really fascinating, and I really screwed up. In the very beginning, I was good. I motivated. I built a great team of people. I'm talking specifically about Redbox, which was initially owned by McDonald's, and then half of it was sold to Coinstar, and then eventually, we outgrew everybody. When I came in, I was chief operating officer, but we did $39,000 in revenue the first year. But as we grew,
I want everybody to hear that for a sec. Redbox, year one, $39,000 in revenue.
$39,000. We had 6 kiosks in Bethesda, Maryland. And when I came on, my objective, what I was tasked to do was figure out what the business model is that can drive more frequency to McDonald's restaurants. Because the whole idea was, if we rent DVDs at McDonald's, remember we're wholly owned by McDonald's at this time. When you return the movies, you will come back, you'll smell the burgers and fries, and you'll create an incremental transaction.
Whose idea was that to turn McDonald's locations into distribution hubs for movies?
It started, in the 10 years prior to that, McDonald's had done very well these one-off deals selling movies to customers, like in their Happy Meal. You might get a coupon for a $5 movie, or you might get a copy of a movie with various programs going on. So McDonald's as a corporate entity knew that their customers loved movies. And around 2002, McDonald's had their first declining year-over-year sales. And their president, I believe his last name was Greenberg, was a very innovative guy. And he invited a bunch of people from all over the world, from the McDonald's organization, from Australia and Germany and France, to get together in Washington, D.C. and brainstorm on how to reinvigorate sales. This is where they came up with the Healthy Choices menu. They had this idea to put Wi-Fi cell towers in the Golden Arches. And one of their real estate developers in France, believe it or not, his name was Jean Doe, said, what if we rent movies, you have to return them, and they'll, like I said, smell the burgers and fries, and we'll create another transaction. So it was his idea. And they thought, okay, let's put 3 or 4 people together and let's try to do that. They came to us at Netflix when I was still at Netflix and tried to get us at Netflix to help them build that business, because they recognized that they didn't know anything about it and they knew Netflix did. And I thought it was a great idea. Back in the early 80s, I had done a vending machine business that failed miserably. But Reed and Marc and everybody at Netflix didn't want to touch McDonald's with a 10-foot pole. They thought, this is not the brand connection.
I was going to say, was it just a brand quality issue that's like a kind of a tackier, more of like a low rent brand in their mind? Yeah.
They were like McDonald's avoiders. Like it wasn't good food. And so this whole idea that I was tasked with was, how do you build a business model in a kiosk that is kind of like a video store, but actually creates momentum? So, I realized what these guys were doing with the 6 kiosks they had was they were trying to take one business model and not change it and put it in a different environment, which consumers didn't want. Consumers, in a video store, you want to browse, you want to talk to people, you want to look at a big selection. In a kiosk, you want a, immediate a determination of what you want. You don't want to browse. You don't want to shop. Right. You want an obvious choice. So
typically, if you think of the kiosk business, it's almost like one product per kiosk. Like if you go to a mall, you have 10 products, 10 kiosks.
Yeah. I mean, the more you have, the harder it, in fact, you suppress consumption by giving too many choices. And so that's what I did. I started experimenting. I had a big selection. I had a small selection. I had low pricing, high pricing in front of the store, inside the restaurant. And I finally came up with this model that was $1 a night, a very limited selection, right as you walk in the door of the McDonald's, and the business just took off. I mean, it went from 6 rentals a day or 10 rentals a day to 60 rentals a day.
And just to be clear, that 10x multiplier effect came simply by tweaking the user experience at the kiosk. So it was literally like at the software level, you just changed it and it blew up.
Yeah, it was, I look at these things like 3 legs of the stool. The customer is looking for value, like is this, so, price, and looking for, in this environment, very simple selection. Like, don't give me 200 choices, give me a couple dozen, and not stuff that's hard to decide if I like it, but, the big hit blockbusters, super low price. And the third stool was where you are, right in front, right when you walk in the door. So because when I had a small selection and inside the store and a low price, it didn't work. When I had a big selection and a low price, but in front of the store, it didn't work. It was when all 3 of those things were together, in front of the store, a low price and a limited selection. That's when it took off.
God, that is such a lesson for those of us, entrepreneurial types that have an idea, try an idea, evaluate the idea, but don't necessarily iterate the idea or ask the deeper question about why we got the feedback that we did. Because you could have stopped at 2 legs of that stool and just told your guys, sorry, it doesn't work.
Yeah. And I find this over and over again is that, especially with a consumer product, you have to hit it on all 3 of those legs of the stool. So would you say that you've extrapolated from this a broader formula that you apply to business as a whole? I think so. I wish it was simpler, but knowing what is the leg of the stool, what is the right variable. But what it means is you have to set up environments where you can properly test all these kind of different variables in different kind of combinations.
So in this environment, the three variables were price, selection, and location.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's some minor variables as well, the merchandising, big artwork versus small artwork. But those were the three big.
And what's interesting is, to some degree, I wonder how much of it, like if you had been trying to put up Redbox or DVD rental locations in a different environment, if those three variables might have been different, but because it was in the context of a McDonald's, which is itself about price, selection, and location, you had to check those same boxes to match the environment.
True. Absolutely true. And some things are true, whether it's McDonald's or anywhere, and that's speed and ease of transaction.
Right.
You'll always see, if you go by a McDonald's, you'll see people sometimes standing out front with stopwatches measuring how long it takes to go through the drive-through, how quickly people make change. And it's that I found to be something that's true in any transaction. I was at Hertz.
You're saying that's McDonald's testing themselves.
It was usually the owner checking his team. But if almost any business you go to today, the longer they take and the kind of the stupider of the process, the stupider ideas of the process, like, why do you keep needing to know my name? I have an account.
Right.
Why do I have to fill out paperwork? You have all my information. Those things, I think, are things that, as a business, every time you can get rid of like steps that are a waste of the customer's time, the bigger your business can be. And I find those variables all the time.
Yeah, we're actually going through right now in Entra. We're starting to run tests of our funnel, our front end customer acquisition funnel, where we've gotten rid of all the upsells. Like we typically have, there's a tripwire course that's, depending on the ad, $7, $39. It's a low cost, right? And then we have like, hey, would you like to add this and this? And, it's great. You get some revenue out of it. But we're starting to test it without the upsells, because the upsells it simply delays the time from the purchase to the consumption. And what we're finding is so far, and I mean, it's a small sample size, but what we found so far is that even getting rid of revenue producing intermediate steps that, actually give up revenue, we're seeing better user experience, more consumption, more engagement, and ultimately more repeat business or back-end purchases, because we just made it faster and easier up front, even to our own expense.
Yeah. It's over and over again. I see, like, when you remove friction from the transaction and the relationship with a customer, the stronger that long-term relationship is, and ultimately the more revenue you generate. But you're right. Sometimes you have to give up in order to get, that longer-term revenue. And that's hard. That's a hard decision.
That's interesting. So, you know what? Can we jump? I know we don't have a ton of time left, and I actually would like to jump ahead to MoviePass. Yeah, if we could, because and I want you to contextualize what I'm about to say, but it wasn't a fabulous success for, like, MoviePass it's not around anymore, right?
No, it's the original founders are trying to resurrect it, but we went into bankruptcy in early 2020.
Okay, cool. So, but yet at the same time, I mean, it did kind of take off, right? I mean, I read a number like 3 million subscribers in less than a year or something.
Yeah.
What's the story there?
Well, the idea and the thing that was really driving me was to do the same thing for cinema as Netflix did for home entertainment. This whole idea of having to make a la carte decisions for what you wanted to watch, what you were willing to spend money on, really suppressed people's interest in discovering, new movies or new TV shows. So by creating a subscription, what I thought we could do was to get people back to the cinema to see films that normally they'd wait for on Netflix. And, my passion was around independent filmmakers who just absolutely desperately want people to see, this work that they've created on the big screen. And, in a social environment, you got people around you and so on. And so this whole idea was built around that vision. And what I found is that the industry, the cinema industry or the theater industry, is just this very archaic group of people who are totally beholden to the studios. The studios essentially dictate price. Unlike everywhere else in the world, you pay the same thing to go see a Marvel movie as you go to see an independent, small documentary at the movie theaters. And that's all because, the studios essentially force theaters to charge the same price. And so what I thought we could do is reinvigorate that. What I really failed to do, and in fact, in my book, one of the second MoviePass chapter is called "How I Forgot Everything I Ever Learned." And what I realized is, when you're building a business that disrupts some big industries, you have to spend a lot of time building allies. And I failed in a lot of ways at MoviePass, but one of the big ones was building enough allies to get us through the tough parts. And
well, you said it folded in spring in 2020, right?
Yeah, in January of 2020, but it had kind of collapsed the year.
You can't blame it on the pandemic.
No, it was before the pandemic.
Okay, interesting. Because it is fundamentally a great idea. It's like, hey, honey, do you want to go to the movies? Well, like you say, actually, they're kind of expensive, right?
Well, we had so many people write us and say, this has reinvigorated our romance.
Yeah.
My wife and I are going on dates again, going to movies. We had people who said, now we've changed our book club into a going to the movies every Friday club. And independent filmmakers were just, loving it. We were in some cases buying 20% of the movie tickets for small box office films, even though it was only 6% nationwide of all tickets sold. So, but it was a great example of not remembering all the lessons I had learned and that all of us as entrepreneurs learn and applying them in a fast moving environment.
Well, that's probably a great segue because, and I have not finished your book, but I was fortunate to get an advanced copy and I got through a decent chunk of it and it is really fantastic.
Thank you.
As somebody who recently published a book and knows what goes into that, kudos. It's a lot of work. And it helps to have, I think the precondition for writing a great book is to have a lot of great things to say, right? So the life you've lived certainly helped. But I think that's a good kind of cliffhanger, frankly, like how Mitch forgot everything he learned along the way. And if you want to go learn everything Mitch knew and then forgot, get the book. Maybe talk a little bit about the book. It's coming out soon, depending when this gets published. It may be out, but how can people get it? And then actually more broadly, how can people come learn more about you?
Well, it comes out on September 6th. It's published by Hachette. I'm real excited about it just because I do think that there's some stories in there that I think many entrepreneurs will recognize and go, yep, that I'm facing that same problem. And I try to tell the stories in a kind of a regular way. I'm not preaching to anybody. I'm not trying to tell you this is how it's done. I'm just giving some examples that I think are, just allow individuals to process and learn on their own. And so, it was a really exciting and, like, a very difficult challenge to write it in such a way that, made sense and flowed. So it's called Watch and Learn: How I Turned Hollywood Upside Down at Netflix, Redbox, and MoviePass. And it's a lot about the entrenched leaders of industries that aren't open to innovation, because, the big companies like Disney and others, they should have developed Netflix. United, Hertz should have developed Uber, and Hilton should have developed Airbnb. But it's
but,
really,
Blockbuster had a chance at Netflix for $50 million too, and they still couldn't.
They did. And it's a great, I think it's for all of us entrepreneurs that see a problem and try to solve it by creating a new product or service. That, to me, is the most exciting thing about today's world, because it used to be you needed lots of money and a big organization to start a company. Today, you can, virtually do it with an idea and a couple people. And that I think makes the world. Every day you turn around and someone's creating something cool and new.
Yeah, well, I am eager to finish the book and probably reread it. I feel like in a lot of ways, that is what myself and our business Entra, that's kind of what we're doing with the educational industry.
Yeah.
Is just a better way to teach people the more relevant, more correct stuff that gets them further based on what they want, not what we want. What the education system wants is to produce employees for jobs for the companies that make the alumni donations that subsidize it. But what people want is just to live a happy life.
Yeah.
Right. So we're trying to teach them how to do that. But you're right. There are so many, you used a word in your book, sclerotic, that hardened, rigid, unyielding tissue reference that I was like, that's it. That's what I feel about the education industry. It's sclerotic. It's like, why are these people so stuck in their ways? But it's, it gives us lots to talk about, right?
Yeah. Well, it's so awesome that that's what you're doing is you took a problem you saw and you're figuring out a better way, or at least an alternative way for people to learn. And that's what we all have
I would
to
go
do.
so far at risk of overreach. The whole concept of this show about unlocking people's potential. I think that, and maybe we can end with your commentary on this statement. I think it is very difficult for people to discover what they're truly capable of in this world if they don't have a big enough adversary.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Over and over again, I've seen where that challenge of overcoming an enemy, overcoming, kind of a challenging situation, where that is the inspiration. And a lot of times, people don't rise to the occasion. I myself have had several times in my life where I've just thought I can't do that. But that's where kind of true, innovation and kind of making a great life comes from, is like overcoming those challenges or adversaries. That's the beauty of life.
Yeah. It's almost like the ultimate quality of life will be determined by what you get in the habit of doing right after you say you can't do something.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well put. Very well put.
Okay. So you talked about the book. How else can people come find you in the world? Not physically per se.
Well, yeah, I have a website. It's mitchlowe.net. I give speeches around the world. My agent is bigspeak.com. I am excited to always help startups and entrepreneurs. So, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or any of the social media sites. I'm always fascinated by people trying to create a new product or business. It doesn't have to be a paid position. People can always reach out to me and ask me for advice. I never say no, and because I'm just so fascinated by people's challenges.
Wonderful. What a kind perspective to have in this world. Well, Mitch, this has been great. I thank you so much. I've learned so much, even without the $1 billion tidbit that I'm going to make everyone in my team listen to. This has just been a delight. So thanks for being a guest. If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
Uncertain times are times of opportunity. Entrepreneurship is not something you learn by listening. It's not something you learn by watching. Making decisions comes with practice. Breaking down a problem comes with practice.